Have you ever wondered what a mother is willing to sacrifice for the future of her family? How far would you go to ensure your legacy survives, even if it means breaking the very things you swore to protect? Now, picture this, a queen who has everything: beauty, power, and wealth. But there's one thing she craves above all: the male child. What would you say if you knew that this queen would go to any lengths, even if it means betraying her own heart, just to secure her place in history? Queen Sophia of the Great Kingdom of Ojimoko sat in her chamber, gazing out of the massive window that overlooked the royal gardens. She had everything a queen could wish for: riches, power, a loving king by her side. But there was one thing that eluded her, something that seemed to mock her very existence: a male heir. She had tried everything. She had gone to the most powerful diviners, consulted the best doctors, and even made offerings to the gods, but still, she bore no son. 10 daughters had been born to her, each one more beautiful than the last, but each one was discarded in the river or thrown away to the streets. Queen Sophia's heart hardened with each failed pregnancy, each disappointed look from her husband, King Odian. He was a patient man, but even he could not hide the frustration in his eyes whenever Sophia failed to give him the son he so desperately wanted. The kingdom had grown restless. The king's advisors whispered that without a male heir, the throne would be up for grabs. They spoke of other women, of other kingdoms, offering themselves to the king in the hopes of securing their own place in the royal palace. Queen Sophia could feel the whispers in her bones, and the thought of another woman sitting at her place beside the king made her blood boil. So, she had made up her mind. She would do whatever it took to secure her kingdom, even if it meant going against everything she had ever believed in. Every time she gave birth to a daughter, she would lock herself in her chambers, weeping silently, knowing her husband would be disappointed once again. Then, it happened. Queen Sophia's pregnancy reached its final stages. This time, she was sure that she would finally bear a son. Her heart raced with anticipation. She could already picture the crown being passed down to the little prince she would deliver, his small hands gripping the royal scepter as he would one day sit on his father's throne. But when the time came, and the child was born, her hopes were dashed. A girl. The doctor tried to comfort her, but Queen Sophia barely heard him. Her eyes locked onto the child in her arms, a perfect, innocent little girl with bright eyes that shone like the moon. Anger surged through her. She had tried, hoped, and sacrificed for so long, but it seemed that the gods had cursed her. In her rage and frustration, she ordered the child to be taken from her, and the moment the palace servant stepped out with the baby, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief. That night, as she lay alone in her bed, something strange happened. Her stomach churned with pain. At first, she dismissed it as a reaction to the emotional toll of the birth, but as the hours passed, the pain intensified. And then, she began to feel something even worse than physical agony and emptiness. A cold, hollow feeling deep inside her, as if something was being ripped from her soul. Queen Sophia had heard the stories. The legends of mothers who had harmed their own children and faced terrible consequences. She dismissed them as nothing but myth. But as the moonlight poured through her window, casting eerie shadows across her chamber, she began to doubt everything she had ever believed. Could it be? She whispered to herself. Was this the price she would pay for the child she had thrown away? The days after the birth seemed to drag on endlessly for Queen Sophia. She sat on her golden throne, surrounded by lavish decorations and treasures, yet her mind remained in turmoil. The emptiness inside her grew with each passing day, gnawing at her thoughts like a disease. It wasn't long before strange things began to happen. At first, it was small, almost imperceptible changes, whispers in the palace hallways, servants glancing at her with fearful eyes. Her advisor spoke less around her, as if afraid to utter the wrong words. King Odian, once so attentive and loving, had become distant, his face etched with worry and frustration. He had not spoken much since the birth of their last child, and Queen Sophia couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lingered on the other young women of the palace. One evening, Queen Sophia sat in front of her vanity, brushing her hair, when she noticed something unusual. A dark strand of hair had appeared in the once golden locks that framed her face. Confused, she pulled at it, only to see more dark strands appearing in the mirror. The hair seemed to grow rapidly, and her once fair complexion began to dull. "What is happening to me?" she whispered, running her fingers through her hair in disbelief. Her skin, once radiant and glowing with youth, now felt coarse and dry. Her reflection in the mirror seemed unfamiliar, as though she was no longer the same woman. The emptiness inside her had grown so large that it seemed to consume everything, including her very being. That night, as she lay in bed, an inexplicable chill swept through the room. The coldness gnawed at her bones, and she shivered uncontrollably. A low whisper seemed to echo in the chamber, though no one was there. "The blood of your children stains your hands," the voice hissed, sending a shiver down her spine. "The gods will not forgive you." Queen Sophia's eyes shot open, heart racing. She sat up in bed, breathing heavily, but there was nothing. The whisper was gone. She glanced around the room, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking in the corner, but the room was empty, silent. The curse had begun. As the days turned into weeks, the palace was struck by an inexplicable series of misfortunes. Crops failed. Trade routes were attacked by bandits. Several of the king's trusted soldiers disappeared without a trace. A deadly fever began to spread among the people, and whispers of a curse became louder with each passing day. King Odion, in a desperate bid to protect his kingdom, consulted the kingdom's elders. They told him that the palace had been cursed, that Queen Sophia's actions had angered the gods, and now the kingdom would suffer the consequences. The king, desperate to save his people and his lineage, began to distance himself from the queen. His love for her had turned to fear and anger. Queen Sophia could see the change in his eyes. He no longer looked at her with affection but with suspicion and dread. One day, as she walked through the gardens of the palace, Queen Sophia stumbled upon an old woman sitting by the palace gates. The woman's face was wrinkled, and her eyes gleamed with a strange knowledge. "Your reign is ending, my queen," the old woman said, her voice raspy. "The child you cast aside will come back for you." Queen Sophia recoiled, but before she could respond, the old woman disappeared into the mist, leaving the queen to wonder if she had imagined the encounter. The following weeks were an unrelenting storm of misfortune. The kingdom, once thriving and peaceful, now seemed to be cursed at every turn. It was as though a dark cloud had settled over Ojimoko, and Queen Sophia felt it tightening around her every day. She had always believed in her power as queen, but now, it seemed as though she had no control over anything, not even her own fate. Her health worsened. The dark strands in her hair grew thicker, and her skin became pallid, like something was draining the life out of her. She had not slept peacefully in weeks, haunted by nightmares of the children she had abandoned. In her dreams, they cried out for her, their voices echoing in the vast, empty halls of the palace. One evening, while wandering the palace corridors, she overheard a conversation between two palace servants. "I heard the king is thinking of marrying another woman," one whispered, her voice full of gossip. "A woman who can give him the son he needs to carry on his legacy." Sophia froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She had feared this day would come, but hearing it from the servants made it feel all too real. The king, her husband of many years, was considering taking another wife, someone who could give him what she couldn't. She had failed him, failed her kingdom, failed her son. And in the depths of her despair, Queen Sophia realized that the curse she had long heard of was no mere superstition. It was real. Every child she had thrown away, every innocent life she had ended in her desperate pursuit of a son, had come back to haunt her. The gods were angry, and now they were punishing her for her sins. But the worst part was the realization that she could never undo what she had done. There was no going back. She had made the choice to throw away her children, to abandon them for the sake of her own pride and desire for power. And now, that same power had slipped through her fingers like sand. One night, as she sat alone in her chamber, she heard a soft cry, faint at first, but growing louder. It sounded like a child's wail. Her heart skipped a beat as she rushed toward the sound. She followed the cry through the palace halls, her steps hurried, her breath quickening. But as she turned the corner, the crying stopped. There, standing in the dimly lit hallway, was a small child, a girl. Her eyes were wide with innocence, but there was something about her that sent a chill down Queen Sophia's spine. The child's clothes were ragged, and her hair was tangled, but her gaze was sharp, piercing. It was as if she was looking straight into Queen Sophia's soul. "You abandoned me," the girl said in a voice that was hauntingly familiar. "Now you must pay." The words echoed in the queen's ears as she backed away, her heart racing in terror. The girl's eyes seemed to glow with an unnatural light, and for a brief moment, Queen Sophia thought she saw the reflection of the river in them, the same river where she had thrown her children away. But before she could speak, the girl vanished into the darkness. Queen Sophia collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "What have I done?" she whispered through sobs. "What have I become?" The world she had once controlled was slipping from her grasp, and in that moment, she knew that there was no escape from the consequences of her actions. The days seemed to blur together as the kingdom's plight deepened. The crops failed once again, and the fever that had spread through the land took more lives than any could have anticipated. The palace itself was not spared from the calamities. As if the walls themselves were crumbling, the once grand halls of the royal residence now felt cold and lifeless. Queen Sophia, trapped in her own self-loathing, could barely bring herself to leave her chambers. The guilt that gnawed at her heart grew unbearable. It was as if the very air she breathed was filled with the ghost of the children she had thrown away. Their cries echoed in her mind every waking hour. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her hands that had once been soft and elegant but now appeared old and cracked. Her reflection in the mirror was unrecognizable, her beauty had faded, her once glorious hair now coarse and tangled. The sound of hurried footsteps outside her chamber door broke her thoughts. It was one of the palace servants. "Your Majesty, you must come quickly," the servant said in a panicked voice. "The king has summoned you. He says the kingdom can no longer bear the burden of your curse." A chill ran down Queen Sophia's spine. She knew what this meant. Her worst fear had come to pass, the king was finally turning away from her. His patience had run out. He had been patient for so long, but now, there was no more room for forgiveness. She followed the servant through the palace halls, her steps heavy with dread. As she entered the royal throne room, King Odian was standing by the window, his back to her. "Sophia," the king said in a quiet voice, without turning around. "The time has come." Queen Sophia felt her heart stop. "The time for what?" King Odian finally turned to face her, and his eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth she had once known. "The kingdom is suffering. We cannot continue like this. You have brought this upon us. Your actions, your refusal to give me a son, have cursed this land." The king's words pierced her like 1,000 daggers. "Please, Odian," she begged, her voice trembling. "I never wanted this. I only wanted to give you the son you needed, the son who could carry on our legacy." "The gods have spoken," King Odian said, his tone firm. "You have failed us all." Queen Sophia's chest tightened. She could barely breathe as the weight of her actions bore down on her. She thought of the children she had abandoned, the innocent lives that had been tossed aside for the sake of her pride. Her kingdom, her marriage, and her very soul were in ruins because of the choices she had made. In that moment, the palace doors burst open, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the same child she had seen in the hallway, the girl with the glowing eyes. But now, she was no longer a small child. She had grown into a young woman, her presence radiating with an eerie power. "You abandoned me, Queen Sophia," the young woman said, her voice now deep and resonant. "You cast me aside as if I were nothing, but I am your punishment. I am the embodiment of everything you've done." Queen Sophia's eyes widened with horror as she realized the truth. This was one of the children she had thrown away, one of the daughters who had been cast into the river. And now, she had returned to claim justice. "You," Queen Sophia whispered, her voice cracking. "You're my child." The young woman nodded, her eyes filled with both sorrow and wrath. "Yes, I am. And I have come to show you the consequences of your actions." The room grew colder, and Queen Sophia could feel the walls closing in. She tried to speak, but no words came. She reached out to the girl, her daughter, but the young woman stepped back, her expression hardening. "You wanted a son, but you threw away the daughters the gods gave you. And now, you will suffer the consequences." As the words left the young woman's lips, the entire palace seemed to tremble. The floor beneath Queen Sophia's feet cracked open, and from the depth of the earth, a dark mist began to rise. The mist enveloped her, choking her with the stench of death and regret. She struggled to breathe as the world around her descended into chaos. King Odian stood frozen, unable to move or speak, as the curse took hold of the kingdom. It was too late now. The gods had spoken, and Queen Sophia would pay the price for the sins she had committed. The young woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as the palace walls crumbled around them. The kingdom had fallen into darkness. Ajamoko, once a place of wealth and prosperity, was now a land of ruin, its people starving and lost. Crops withered in the fields, and the fever continued to ravage the population. King Odian had locked himself in his chambers, unable to bear the weight of the kingdom's fall, while Queen Sophia, broken and defeated, wandered the palace halls like a shadow of her former self. But the worst was yet to come. The young woman, the one whom Queen Sophia had abandoned, had disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but the echo of her words. "You will suffer the consequences." Queen Sophia sat alone in her chamber, gazing out of the shattered window, her mind lost in the haunting memories of her past decisions. The emptiness she had felt all those weeks ago now felt like a weight she could never escape. She could feel the walls closing in on her. The world around her had fallen apart, and it was all because of the choices she had made, the children she had thrown away in her desperate pursuit of a male heir. Her heart was heavy with regret. She had failed as a mother, as a queen, and as a wife. There was nothing left for her now but the consequences of her actions. But then, one fateful day, something unexpected happened. As Queen Sophia walked through the palace gardens, her steps slow and heavy with sorrow, she heard a familiar sound. It was the cry of a child. At first, she thought it was a figment of her imagination, a cruel reminder of the children she had abandoned. But the sound grew louder, clearer, until she found herself standing before a small figure, a young girl, no more than 6 or 7, dressed in tattered clothes. The child's eyes were bright and full of innocence, and as she looked up at Queen Sophia, something in her heart stirred. The girl stepped forward, her small hands outstretched. "Are you, my mother?" the girl asked, her voice soft and full of hope. Queen Sophia's heart stopped. It was as though the world had frozen around her. This child, this innocent little girl, was one of the daughters she had cast aside. One of the children she had thrown into the river, thinking they were not worth her love. And yet, here she was, standing before her, alive and full of life. The queen fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." The girl smiled, a smile that was both kind and forgiving. "You can't undo the past, but you can change the future." Queen Sophia reached out, her trembling hands gently taking the girl's small hands in hers. She looked into the child's eyes, filled with innocence and grace. In that moment, she realized the true meaning of motherhood. It wasn't about a son to carry on a legacy. It wasn't about power or pride. It was about love. The kind of love that she had denied her children. The curse had not only destroyed the kingdom, it had destroyed her. But now, in this moment, she had a chance at redemption. She had a chance to make things right, to show the love she had withheld for so long. With the girl by her side, Queen Sophia returned to the palace, determined to undo the damage she had done. The kingdom may have fallen, but it was not too late to rebuild it. She would start with the children she had cast aside, bringing them back and raising them with love and care. She would make sure that no child would ever feel abandoned again, no matter their gender. And as for the gods, Queen Sophia knew that they would never forget her actions. But perhaps, just perhaps, they would show her mercy. For she had learned the greatest lesson of all. Moral lesson: all children are a gift from God. No child should ever be discarded or abandoned, for each child holds a future full of potential. Dear viewers, what's your views about this? Will you ever abandon a girl child just because you needed a male child so desperately? Let us know your views in the comment section below.